want to welcome to the stage now. We're going to have our fireside chat focused on clinical trial diversity. First of all, we have Tesheia Johnson, Deputy Director of Clinical Research at Yale School of Medicine, and Dr. Priscilla Pemu, Associate Dean for Clinical Research at Morehouse Medicine, for a fireside chat. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, we heard a lot about health equity and a lot about some of the legislation that the Congresswoman and some of the other members of the CBC are working on. But I'm really interested in this conversation because it's something that we've been talking a lot about. I've been doing some research on and knowing that we were going to sit down this morning. But I'd like to start with maybe you both all kind of laying the groundwork a little bit in terms of what's the baseline? Clinical research, and in particular, the efforts around diversity in clinical trials. Yale and Morehouse were both selected alongside Vanderbilt University to partner with pharma to advance clinical trial diversity. So why don't we start here? Just, I think for those of us who aren't in the medical profession, what's the baseline of where we're starting? And then we'll talk a little bit about the program and how it's going.
Happy to start. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. Hard act to follow, I'll say. But even though Black and brown people make up about 32% of our population, only about 6% are represented in clinical trials today. And even if you look at the FDA snapshots data for all of the therapeutics that were approved in 2022, you can see that some of the clinical trials literally have no enrollment by African American or Hispanic individuals. And when you think about the importance of understanding how drugs are going to work, potential side effects in multiple populations, race and ethnicity, we just talked about the issues with COVID and the disproportionate representation we have in all diseases, not just in blood clots and prostate cancer and breast cancer and so on. You can see how important it is to understand how therapeutics will work in all populations. And so that's the work that we're trying to do, make sure that we're speaking to everyone, that we're speaking in a way that everyone can understand about the importance of research participation.
Definitely. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. So I think I'll give a very concrete example, right? So we're all human. We're more alike than we're not. Why does it matter? Why do you want to have all different kinds of people in a clinical trial? Well, here's an example. How many of you have heard of the medication clopidogrel? Plavix? Okay, good. Thank you. So this is a medicine that we usually give to people when they get a stent, which is sort of a scaffolding in the blood vessels of your heart, if you've had a heart attack or anything like that. Well, what happens when you get a stent placed is your body immediately, what your body does, the reason we don't bleed out every day is you constantly get little cuts in your body immediately seals it up. What does that is your platelets. Well, so when we put in a stent, your body tries to clot it off. So you take Plavix to prevent that clotting so your blood vessels stay open and you get what you need for your heart. Well, when the trials for Plavix were done, the usual people who participate in trials is who was in those studies. And then it was released onto the market, and people who were, say, Hispanic heritage or Samoan would take those medicines after they had a stent placed and would show up in the emergency room still having chest pain, and we didn't understand why. Eventually, we figured it out. Why? They had a version of an enzyme. So when you take a Plavix, it's in a pro form. It doesn't actually work in that form. Your body has to convert it to the version that works. What does the conversion is the version of the enzyme that you have to do so. Well, those people weren't included, so nobody ever knew that this was an issue. That is why, on a very practical level, and you can find that in all different kinds of medications and things, why all of us, different kinds of people, need to be involved when we're going through this discovery process for medications, which is what clinical trials are.
Thank you for that. I feel like it was a real life example that all of us can understand. You don't want to, have that happen, certainly, especially when it comes to stints and something that is really life and death, truly.
Right.
Tesheia, set the stage for us about how this program has been working, how it was set up, what its aims have been.
So EQB Med, which is Equitable Breakthroughs in Medicine, is our project. And we're partnered, as you said, with Morehouse School of Medicine, my colleague here, Vanderbilt University, but also the Research Centers in Minority Health, the Coordinating Center out of Morehouse, which is 22 minority serving institutions. And over an 18-month period, we're going to stand up clinical trials in communities that have traditionally been less involved in clinical trials, because we all know that if we can bring research closer to where someone lives, works, prays, make it convenient, we can consider all of the things that are important to them, there will be a higher percentage of participation by all individuals. And so the purpose of our program is to engage community sites, federally qualified health centers, community hospitals and practices in clinical trials, make sure that they have the resources to be involved in clinical trials, have everything that they need to be regulatorily compliant, but also in a different way than in the past, have partnerships deep in the community. We ourselves at Yale have very deep partnerships with the African Methodist Episcopal Zion churches and community-based organizations, which help us carry a message and make sure that we're speaking to everyone in the community and that our trials represent the priorities of our community. And so that's what's different about our activity. It'll be partnered with the community so that we're really making sure that all of the work that we're doing is entrenched in what the community needs and wants.
Priscilla, I want to kind of build on that, right? Which is a big part of this is as Tesh was saying, the idea that kind of going into communities, being one and among the community is trying to get more folks to actually participate in the trials. What have you seen? I know you kind of do some of this direct work.
So why did we structure EQB Med the way we did? It's based out of an understanding of what the history is, because if you don't know where you're coming from, you're not likely to go where you want to go. Plus, you also have to know where you want to go. But understanding that the reason people from our community don't participate in research is not one simple reason. There are multiple layers to it, bringing that understanding into crafting what EQB Med looks like. So for one, there's a lot of conversation out there for good reason that people don't trust, right? Why should I let you test this medicine on me? Go do it over there and then let me know when it works, that I can go participate. There are several ways that people have looked at resolving this issue. What we have decided with EQB Med is the people who have relationships with their providers that they trust, right? They have a longitudinal relationship that they will engage with. If those providers ask them to take part in research, however, what we have found is some of those providers who have these trusted relationships with their patients are not the ones who are running clinical trials. And so how do we bring that group, people who actually have trusted relationships with people that they take care of, to the place where they can also be the ones running clinical trials? So this entire setup is to help to support that. The other element, which I think is very innovative, is the idea that as a scientist, so I'm an investigator and a clinician, I can sit in my office and design a study. What we find out a lot of the time is unless you have the voices of people who will be participating in that conversation of design, you will end up with a design that works for you, but not for the person you're hoping it'll work for. And so having those community relationships, having them at the table, having them bring up things they actually care about, things that they want to have investigated, things that they want to participate in is a big part of this innovation. And I think what has really helped is the ability to have people with expertise in doing this already at the table, and then having resources so that when you identify, a reason that an investigator, a physician, a potential investigator that has those patients and potentially could do clinical trials is not doing them, there's a gap between here and there. So them helping us define what that gap is, and then the resources to fill that gap.
Super interesting. It makes a ton of sense, actually, when you kind of think about it. One of the things that you all are hoping for is the idea of equitable breakthroughs. Talk about, I'm going to give this to both of you, talk about what that is, where maybe you've seen some progress towards that, and what you're hoping for when it comes to that.
You want me to start? Okay, cool. So for us, I think one of the biggest things, so first we decided this is a learning phase, right? We're going to do this like research. So we have a bunch of ideas about what could work. We're not just going to go out there and say, this is what it is and that's how it's going to be done. But there is measurement built into the entire process. And we have an 18-month learning phase. So for me, that is a huge innovation. But within that, there are milestones. There's the discovery within each site that's brought to the table of what's going on and the documentation of what that is. So that even though I'm at a historically black medical school, a partner medical school, say Meharry or Charles Drew, just because they're a HBMS is not the exact same as we are. So identifying what those issues are, documenting them so that they can be repeated. You remember those experiments? You document the conditions of the experiment. You measure, measure, measure. That way anyone else who comes behind and wants to do the same thing has a path to go through. I think that's a big key thing for us as an innovation.
And I'll just add to that. I think one of the really important things for us is a lot of the issues around mistrust in clinical trials is the helicoptering issue. I want you to be a part of my clinical trial, so I'm showing up today, and I'm asking you to be a part of the clinical trials. I never met you before. You don't know who I am. No kind of introduction to the process. And so we want to make sure that what we build is sustainable. We want to make sure that the investigators, the physicians that we're bringing to the table who haven't been at this table before have the resources to be successful. We want to make sure that we have that entire infrastructure, but not just the infrastructure, but a person you can call and say, hey, I'm trying to figure out how to do this. And then we're measuring that activity, as Dr. Pemu said. We're documenting those things to make it better for the next physician that we bring in. But we also want to make sure that all of the organizations that are selected, the sites that are participating, that they have something, even at the end of the learning phase, that they have a path, they have a plan for how they can move forward in the space of clinical trials, and that they've got the resources to be sustainable. And I think that mentorship, that sustainability model, all of those things are innovative and different about past efforts because we're being intentional about all of the partnerships. We're being intentional about how to place the resources. We're being intentional about the community that we're trying to build in this space.
I want to ask, you all have both been involved in this for a long time, clinical trials, thinking about this. What, if anything, has maybe surprised you about the process so far, about what you've learned? You know, you talk about testing and writing and, you know, kind of finding out some of the things that maybe you weren't anticipating.
I think one of the really important pieces for us is all of our partners, we want them to be invested in the same mission. We want to make sure that everyone at the sites, all of our partners that are supporting our sites, that are helping us to operationalize this, have the same vision. And aligning vision, mission, and resources has been a complicated process. But I think that that's a really important piece, and it's surprising. I think the other thing that has been surprising as we have gone on this journey to document what each site needs, what resources are coming into the table. We have three sites chosen now. Each one is so different. Their journey is different. What they need for resources is different. What they want to achieve. It's not just about being another clinical trial site or having X number of studies. They actually have visions and missions that are very different in terms of how they want to participate in clinical trials. And so that's, I think, been a surprise. We thought that there would be a little more harmonization across the sites, as Dr. Pemu said.
What she said.
All right, we'll leave that one there. We're quickly running out of time, but I have two kind of questions I want to posit to you before we close out this session. First, you have a room full of folks who probably for the most part aren't involved in the work of this, support it. But there's also some staffers here. There's people that are on Capitol Hill. What do you wish that people in Washington, lawmakers, others that are in this space, knew about clinical trial diversity and its importance?
I will start. So it's really great that now we have an FDA guidance with respect to diversity in clinical trials. I think that's huge. Policy is a huge driver of what ends up happening in the real world. I think that where we are now, so there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of commitment and discussion around we need diversity. There is some discussion that's kind of in every direction, which is expected, about what exactly does diversity look like? How do you define it? How do you measure it? There are some that are obvious and some that are less obvious. I think that what I would like for Congress to pay attention to is the conversation that we're hearing, being a historically Black medical school, that, oh, diversity is divisive. I think that Congress needs to listen carefully to where that's coming from and make sure that they don't buy into it and stop this work in its tracks. I think it's really critical that the work of making sure that everyone can live to their best is not stopped for any reason, and that it's allowed to continue and supported to continue.
I could say what she said too, but I think another really important point, personally, you said, we've been in this space for a long time doing this work, hard work of talking to clinical trials. I remember starting this, I couldn't even get my own family to say yes to understanding clinical trials and participating when I first started. Having the resources to do that is huge, and having the resources to make sure that we're speaking to everyone, that everyone has access to a clinical trial. There's new data. Where you live matters, not DNA, but ZNA. And so if we can't have a clinical trial in a rural setting, in states that haven't had traditional medical school settings, spread out across the states, those things will matter as to how long you live. And that matters because the latest research is happening in places where people understand the importance of innovation. So it's really important, again, around this conversation of not making it divisive, but saying, we all have rural populations. We all have populations that are underserved in healthcare, that are costing too much money because they don't have the right healthcare. So wouldn't it be better to have the research, have the data, have the trials, have the infrastructure set up there so we really understand disease at a level that is going to allow us to treat and change these health disparities that we see in every disease state?
All right, we're going to end on this last question, which is, I think there's a lot of opportunity that you both have expressed and optimism when it comes to the funding and the kind of cross-pollination of kind of thinking about different trial studies and how to have more diversity. Project forward for us. This work continues, the funding continues. What's the impact it could have? Priscilla?
That every patient that shows up for care knows not only what's already approved, but what's the leading edge, what's possible, what they could qualify for, that the gap between clinical trials and clinical care is completely closed, that people always know what else is available, and it's not this black box that people have to reach out to, because I think when we do that, we make sure that everyone can get the best that there is.
And I'd say one of the really important things for me, working closely with our community partners, that they've taught us that just having knowledge is not power. You have to know how to activate it. And so another important piece of that is that every patient comes to a healthcare facility armed with the knowledge of what are the trials that are potentially available to me? What should I expect in care? What should I know about the side effects of the medicine? Because they've been studied in people who look like me, who have the same health problems as me. And I think that that would be a really, if I could just dream, it would be that.
All right, what a great note to end on. Thank you both so much for joining us on stage this morning.